Post-production pebbles here. I have a video in the description if you're an absolute beginner. I was going to teach you what HTTP and HTTPS protocols were, but I feel that Fireshift's video covers vastly more topics in a better fashion, in my opinion. But this video is meant if you actually just want to start learning the fundamentals of web development, like hands-on, if you're like a true beginner. Back to the video. Okay, so I started WAMP, and I'm on localhost, and this is the directory that we're looking at. So we're going to make a new file, or folder I should say, a new folder. And you can name this whatever you want. This is just going to be a JS calculator demo for demo purposes. Then feel free to get out of File Explorer because it's making that noise. And feel free to open up Sublime or the VS Code or whatever your choice is. Doesn't really matter. So now that this is open, we just hit open folder. And then we'll head on to here. And then we're going to make our pretty much just like the skeleton. It's also just good practice just to, I mean, I'll show you once we start referencing files and stuff, but it's just a good idea to make folders for everything. So I'll just do that. So now everything's segregated. And then I'll just keep everything open just so it's just much simpler. So now that we're in the index.html, we're going to just set up the skeleton. So we're going to set up the head, body, etc. I sincerely do recommend as well that you follow along on W3 Schools as well. I have the links in the description, just so you can get like a basic rundown of what, like if you don't understand anything that I'm coding, you can just look it up there. And then now when we refresh our localhost, now we see that this is present. And then we just hit public and it should just render test because that's what we rendered on here. So this is just a mid-junior tip. You can, because normally your developer console will be on the right, and how to change that is you go on these little three dots right here, and then you just pick the dock side right here. Now as you can see, now I just split up the screens in half. So now we should have that extension so we don't have to keep refreshing the this page every time we make a change to the index.html or the CSS or the JavaScript. Okay, so now that we got that up and running, every time we make a change, it should change within 10 seconds. There you go. So now let's start with making a form and just some basic CSS, and we'll reference it in the header. So now when we hit save, this should be able to access the JavaScript file and the CSS file that we just made. And we can test that we have it referenced by just doing body and then just changing the background. So now it's going to be an ugly aqua. It's also a good idea if you are using an extension to refresh, you should hit Shift F5 and it just clears the cache for whatever CSS is already loaded into the browser. There you go. I just forgot to put the relationship is style sheet. So now that that works, let's go back into the CSS and change it to a better color. You can use any color you'd like. I'm going to use like a darkish blue, something like this. It's also a good idea just to set the margin and the padding of everything to be 0, so it's much more easier to style. As you can see, the heading already had padding and margin, so now that we removed it, now we have much more control over everything that we put into this document. So let's make a div, and this is just going to be the container, and we can name this as the container as a class. It's usually a good idea to put for naming conventions like whatever you're containing. So for this instance, this will just be the calculator container. You can use camel case or whatever typing conventions that you like. I like to do a hierarchical kind of thing, so like whatever elements that are already present in the document usually go first, but that's my own conventions. You can have your own, but to me it just makes a lot more sense. So we're going to do it after the body. We're going to reference the class name. So now we're just going to have the raw inputs in there, just to give you a better idea what it would look like them unstyled, and then we can use CSS to make them look pretty. And then we're going to give this an ID for posterity. Because in JavaScript, we're going to have to identify which input we're referencing when we're trying to call onto the document, as we'll see shortly. So now we have to think, okay, what buttons are we going to have on this calculator, right? So we need all the digits, operations, and clear, delete functions, and all that. So now we see that they're unstyled, so they look disgusting. We're going to change this back to text because the number gives it this input on the right. There you go. And then we're going to make a separate container for the text input and output, and then we're going to make a separate container for the buttons themselves. And then as you can see, now it's being formulated much more beautifully. And we'll just finish making the rest of the buttons, and then we're just going to have separate rows and columns for the buttons. And you never want to do more work than you have to, and you're just going to see me copy and pasting. Okay, so now that we have that, now let's make this much more structured, and we'll start naming and giving the buttons classes for what they are. And what I'm doing is control clicking, and you can find the description which extension I'm using. Okay, now we're going to go into the CSS and give the buttons some more padding so it doesn't look so disgusting. It's a good idea to do Shift F5 if your CSS just isn't rendering properly. For the fonts, you can choose whatever your little heart desires, and I'll have that in the description. And as you can see here, it's not showing the right font because it doesn't recognize it, and the default one is Times New Roman for some odd reason. But I'll have a description where you can find fonts on Google. And you can either have it inline or you can have it as import. I recommend doing import because you can just have that in your CSS file instead of having it inline, which is kind of dirty in my opinion, but it's entirely up to you. And you can select the style, or actually I chose the wrong one. I don't know why Lado's here. You can choose the style, aka just the thickness. I'm just going to choose light 300. So now that we have the font imported, it should just work. So when I hit refresh, now we have enter. Just general good practice to just use pixels and percentage. You can look into what REM and EM means and what it is, and it should be in W3 schools. But essentially what it is, just like predefined pixel measurements. You can also use VW and VH, like viewport width and viewport height, respectively. Like say for instance you don't want to use percentage, you just want to use view width. So you can just do, like, if you want to use 50% of the viewport width, then you could just use 50 VW. and it essentially does the same thing as percentage. So if I change this back to like 15% or 15 VW, it'll do the same thing. As you can see. I'm just showing you this because it's just not a good idea. Like, say for instance, or in this case, it's okay just because it's just like a static page. It's much better practice just using flex whenever available. I know if you're making like a custom, like if you're using like a mail service, there's a list of things that can and cannot work. And I'll leave that in the description too if you're also curious. I just want to explain what I just did there. So because it was using flex, it makes it so that everything's inline, so it's gonna like make everything like not pretty in terms of our case. So what I just did is just made it so that it's like it's pretending it's a single element, like this entire thing. So if we just hit inspect, as you saw before it refreshed, it's just treating it as a single element, so it's just making it so that it just formats well. So now that we have this basic layout, let's convert this into a display grid, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then we're just testing basically the what's it called? Just the events in CSS, as you can see. So whenever I hit, now that I have this declared as active, because now that we're in the developer console, it's not gonna have the hover attribute work, just because it's like pretending this is like a touchscreen for some reason. I'm not sure how to disable that. But anyway, let's get out of that, and then here you go. So then we click it. I don't want it to be like this. It's just a test. So now this is just more or less functional. I just want to. Oh, and the other thing I did here was change the width back to, for the text input, back to 100%. So now we're gonna move on to the JavaScript side, and then I will show you how to input that from the HTML. So you just need to add an on-click, right? And then since we're not going to be since we're just going to be splurging all of the functions into the main.js, usually it's just a good practice just to separate. In fact, we'll just do that. For the main ones, we're just going to have the main functions, the ones that we declare for, like, say for instance, since we're going to have an event listener for the key down, so we can disable the input so that we could just use an event listener just to inject text into the input. And that's why I said it's just a good practice just to fuck, what is it called? And that's why I said it's just good practice just to have a folder for your JavaScript, just so that you can just separate as much as possible. And that way it's just much more readable in general as well. So we're just going to make an insert function, and then from now on we're going to put the disabled attribute for this input, so we can no longer or actually just called read only, just so we don't no one is able to just like start typing a bunch of text in here. That's why we need that event listener and a function just to inject the numbers in there. And also, when we do have on-click as well, we just use the same function, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now I'm not, actually when I hit refresh, now I'm not able to type anything, as you can hear my keyboard. And then we'll start with the arithmetic, and let me see. Actually, no, we're gonna have the arithmetic.js have the shunting algorithm function, and I'll have a Wikipedia link in the description, and that just makes it so that it is basically just an algorithm. You can read more into the Wikipedia, but I'll just briefly talk about it here. So when you do have, it basically just follows PEMDAS, is what I'll tell you. So an archaic way of doing this is just having a literal, like, okay, I have this text, I'm going to convert the text to an integer, and we'll talk about what that is in a moment. But essentially, it's just a programmatic way of telling the computer that, okay, we want to do arithmetic with this text. And you do it literally with like plus, minus, equals, and all that. But we're gonna do it the right way. Okay, I want to set you up for good, for the future, for posterity's sake. So for the main.js, we're gonna have the insert function. So how you declare a function, you can read that up in the W3 schools, and I'll just explain the more complex stuff. So in this instance, since we labeled this input as the ID is text underscore IO, if I remember correctly. Yeah, here. So now that we have this ID here, we're going to be referencing that through the DOM. And we're going to be using the getElement.id, and we're going to pass it on. So we're going to do text underscore IO. Then we are going to be injecting it. So now we want the value to be plus equals, and that just means that it's just whatever string is already in the input, it's just going to keep concatenating it. And concatenating means it's just pretty much just like adding it on to what's already pre-existing. Because if you just do the value is equal to, then it would just set it to whatever your I'll just show you why that is important later. But anyway, let's see. So now when we click any one of these buttons, when we call the insert function, now that we have it referenced here in the because we have this this file referenced, so we're also going to be referencing the arithmetic.js, so we can just add that in right now. So now when I hit 1, it doesn't do anything. Well, there you go, I found the problem. So it's just naming pretty much what I'm naming it, or trying to name it. So if I try to reference the value and the parameters for the function, so basically, as you can see, this just passes on this parameter and just labels it as the num variable. So now that this works, now we need to make I mean, this refreshed, like the clear didn't do anything, so now we'll just give pretty much everything the insert function. Except the parentheses, we're going to have an algorithm just to delineate when we need to inject open parenthesis or a closing parenthesis. And then same thing for the equals. You're going to have a separate, basically just referencing the arithmetic.js, and that's what initiates the algorithm to give us the right answer. And then also same things for the clear and delete. We're going to have different ones for that one. And for the clear one, it's just very simple, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we're just going to have a parameterless void function. So essentially it just doesn't really do much. So let's do the clear. So I did something horribly wrong for some reason. It's just not going to let you name it clear. You have to name it clean. Assuming there's some other function that uses the name clear, so just keep that in mind. There you go, so now it works. And then we're also going to have, let me see. So what we're doing, we're just getting the current value, and then we're just going to render out everything except the substring. Yeah, everything except -1 string. So now when we just do this, and then I have to link the function, actually. So now we just do a bunch of these stuffs, and then now it works. And then we're going to move on to the arithmetic. The pseudocode is on Wikipedia, so you can either pause this video or you can wait a couple seconds just to get the instant gratification. But yeah, just a moment. Or actually, I almost forgot. We're gonna have the event listeners, just so we can handle the key presses, just so we can insert the numbers and stuff. So just a moment. So now we just add the event listener, so we go to document.add event listener, and then we're going to do key down. And then the secondary parameter would be a function with no name, and then instead of the parameters is just going to be event. And then it's just a good idea, just so we can have a better idea of like what buttons are pressed when we do press them, so we're going to log them. And then in the event, it's already there so that we just have the event.key. Then we can log more stuff just so we can get more details. Just a moment. So now we refresh this, and I turned off my auto refresher, by the way, just because we're working with JavaScript. Because if you just keep refreshing and you're trying to test out the functions, it's just not good. So now we hit F12, and then now that you see that it is telling me that I'm pressing Z and I forgot a space. So now whatever keys I press is just going to tell me what they are, the value, and the type. So if you type of, and it's just gonna, since the function returns a string of what it is, as you can see here. So it says key press and it's just a string of S. And it also recognizes when you do capital letters, so let me try that. So I'm just holding Shift C, and then as you can see, it's doing capital Z there. It's up to you if you want to leave that log there, but in this instance I will, just so for demonstration purposes. Then we're going to make a function, or actually we're going to be referencing the arithmetic.js, so I'll show you how to import another JavaScript file within another JavaScript file. So we have to make an edit with the entire structure. So natively JavaScript does not allow you to import from another file natively, and yet we have to use something called Babel, and we're not going to get into that in this video, so we're just going to dump everything into one JavaScript file. So you have to label or add the solid attribute for the border, and then we'll add a border radius.
CBT. They want to heat up a kid's cuisine.
So, bruh, moment. So, this is the next day, and so for the border, I just simply, you have to define the thickness, the color, and the type. And you can look at W3 schools what kind of types are. It could be dashed, ridged, etc. So we're gonna make the thickness a little bit thinner because it looks kind of nasty. There you go. Then next we're going to implement the shunting yard algorithm so we can finally do some tests. And the pseudocode is already on Wikipedia, so it really makes no difference whether or not I copy and paste stuff for you. And the GitHub will be in the description. So there's that. And just for demonstration purposes, we're also going to have an event listener in arithmetic.js, just so that we don't have to worry about importing. So what we're utilizing here is something called a Lambda function. So essentially what it is we're just setting a variable So now essentially what we're going to try to do is try to do some math and just see if it works. But first you have to attach the function to the enter. So as you can see from the highlighted line, I figured out that you need to import calc instead of with curly braces for the function name. And then from the, since we're in the current directory, just do /arithmetic.js, and that's how you import it, just for posterity. Moving on. There you go, and now you just made a JavaScript calculator with the shunting algorithm, and you got to work with raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in this video. I sincerely recommend you spend the time to understand what the code is doing before you just plain out copy and paste, because if you just do that, you're not going to make it in this industry. So, if you have any questions, please leave a comment, subscribe if you want to see more videos like these, and have a good day. Thank you.